All right, we are live.
Okay.
All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler. I am Justin. tnholler.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all those other great places. We also have these hollers, holler and all across the state. Thanks to your support. We really do appreciate it. If you're buying or selling a home, do it through Elisa Parker. If you need a lawyer, Abby Rubenfeld is who you should talk to. And if you need any jewelry, John, AJ Martin in Nashville, they are all very supportive of us, and we do appreciate it. Today we are talking to John Geer of Vanderbilt. He is involved he's the co-director of the Vanderbilt Poll that just came out today, and I'm assuming the previous ones as well. And he's going to talk to us about some of the takeaways. John, how are you today?
I'm well, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I guess real quick, let me just flash the headline that you guys had. This is on the Vandy site. Vanderbilt Poll, majority of Tennessee voters now pro-choice, gender gap on developing on key issues. So I guess let's start with, first of all, let me ask you this. How do you conduct the poll? How does that process work?
So, there's a number of different components to it. First, what we do with the poll is we try as best as we can to provide accurate information about what Tennesseans are thinking, and in particular, registered voters. We're not doing a voter-only sample, nor is it just the broad public. It's actually people who are registered voters. And we spend a good deal of time thinking about which questions to ask and how to ask them, and we get advice about that and feedback, because sometimes we get it wrong, and then we try to fix it. So we ask about Medicaid expansion in this poll, and rather than put our money all on one question, we actually asked two different versions of the question, and was able to kind of run a comparison to see if you could move the numbers by mentioning the fact that Mississippi has now expanded Medicaid. Does that help the Tennesseans support it? A little bit, which isn't a big surprise. So we have an advisory board that is made up of both Democrats and Republicans, nobody who's currently elected, but all people in some cases who had held elective office. In other cases, they've just been involved in politics, ranging the full political spectrum. And we really work hard at trying to stay in touch with various elite activists, political elected officials, and others. The data are available for everybody. This is not something that we want to share and make it part of the conversation. Josh Clinton and I, my co-director, we don't think that polls should be everything, but they should be part of the conversation, because if you don't have good polling data, then people will make claims about what the public wants with little evidence. And this is something we've been doing since 2011. And so we have some time series and be able to understand the context and the shifts that have been going on in the state. And it's something that the university is committed to. They put down, we do the poll with the very best cutting edge methods, which means that costs money. But the university doesn't want anything associated with its name that isn't the best. And so we put out that money. And as you can imagine, given the problems that polling's faced over the last few years, that it's not cheap to do it right. It can be cheap to do it wrong, but it's to do it right, it's costly.
Right. I remember that. I ran for Congress, and I remember, you could get these like telepolls for a lot cheaper than, actually people calling and talking to people and having those conversations. It looks like, from what I saw, there were about 1,000 people that were spoken to, all across the political spectrum. And so let's get into some of the findings here. It looks like the headline that you had in the very top line was that Tennessee is becoming more pro-choice. We do see a slight shift to a pro-choice stance, likely a reaction to the Dobbs decision. And then it looks like it was sort of broken down mainly by gender, that females in general were more pro-choice. What can you tell us about what that says about where we are as a state in terms of being pro-choice and how that lines up with what the laws are here?
Right. Well, I think this is the big disconnect. So, the state it's 52% pro-choice, and so there's still a sizable group of people who are pro-life. Most Republicans are pro-life. Most Democrats are pro-choice. But there's a perception in the broader country that Tennessee is becoming more and more conservative. We don't have any data that suggests that. In fact, the data we're talking about now on the abortion issue suggests, if anything, we're becoming slightly more moderate. I think that for the most part, that's probably an artifact of the Dobbs decision. And what I mean by that is that there were a lot of people who thought of themselves as pro-life with Dobbs, with the Roe v. Wade protections in place. And once they were taken away, then all of a sudden a handful of people, more than a handful, but so a few people, adjusted their position. And so, the state has been pro-life, and it's now slightly pro-choice. And I think that speaks to the changing nature of it. The other part of this is, and we didn't do a lot of polling in this one, but we've done it in the past, is the Tennesseans, regardless of partisan stripe, are in favor of exceptions for abortion: rape, incest, fetus, viability of the fetus, these health of the mother, all these things Tennesseans want, but yet our state legislature has been really quite reluctant to pursue any of those, except a possible carve out for the health of the mother. And this is a problem, and it's suggesting that the state legislature is not representing the views of Tennesseans and even of Tennessee Republicans.
Well, I understand why you keep saying state legislature, and I get that, the media does that too. But the truth is, it's the Republican supermajority that are out of state with them, because they're the ones that are passing these draconian laws without exceptions. We even have in our state no exception for raped children to have abortions, and those standalone amendments were blocked unanimously by Republicans. I'm saying that because I know you don't say that in your poll, and I get why, but I do think it's important to point out specifically why our laws are different than what you're saying most people want. And, we really don't have real exceptions. We have many women in this state who have said, basically they had to leave the state to get abortions when their lives were at risk, and we don't have real exceptions. So I think what you're saying is right. And that was another thing that your poll said, which is the latest Vanderbilt poll suggests there continues to be misalignment between the actions of the state legislature, which, my words, the Republican supermajority, and a majority of registered voters on a number of key policies. So is that basically one of the takeaways here for people?
I think it absolutely is. And I think you're absolutely right that, first of all, the supermajority problem that Tennessee faces, and I want to stress this, it's not a Republican problem. It's not a Tennessee problem. It is a national problem. 28 out of 50 states right now have supermajorities. 19 are Republican, 9 are Democrat. That's a serious problem because we need competition. If we don't have competition, we don't get the kinds of policies that average Tennesseans or average Californians or Vermonters or whatever want. And if you go and take a look at the 2022 state house races, in the state Senate, the closest state Senate race was 62-38. That's not competitive. And of the 99 state house races, only 3 were within 5 percentage points. That's not competitive. This is a design by the Republicans through gerrymandering, to control the state legislature. Now, that's not a Republican incentive. That's just, the Democrats would do the same thing if they had the chance, but the Republicans are doing it. And so we have 80% representation in the state legislature in both branches of the state legislature. And yet, Republicans make up it probably would be a 60-40 type of split. The Republicans are the majority party. There's no doubt about that. They should have majority representation, but supermajority sends the representational scheme off the rails and poses problems for average Tennesseans, like women who are, become pregnant, and let's say the fetus sadly dies, which is totally tragic. But how do you handle that? Well, they may choose to have an abortion because of that tragedy, but they're not allowed to in the state, and yet the public wants it.
So I know we're off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I do think this is part of your field of things that you focus on in terms of democracy from what I've seen. So I do want to say, there is a way to deal with the gerrymandering and politicians choosing voters rather than the other way around, and it's fair districting. And yes, in Democratic supermajority states, they gerrymander also, but I guess my general feeling is that there needs to be sort of like a agreement for fair districting in all of these states all at once, which basically would come in the form of federal law, because you're not going to have Democrats disarm when Republicans are not disarming. And so there has to be this national law that says we need fair districting in this country. Is that the way that you see it also? And do you ever see that happening?
Well, I mean, I think the bottom line is that I think about 35 or so of the states, maybe even a few more states, allow the state legislatures to do the redistricting.
Right.
And that's a problem. It just simply is. You need to have some sort of, bipartisan, non-partisan process. But the difficulty is that the state legislatures are not going to unilaterally give up that power. And so then how do you force it? Well, the Constitution does give the states the rights to create these rules. So you might even have to have a constitutional amendment to pull this off. And that's just, the framers had a lot of ideas, and one of them was to make change hard. And they've succeeded in that. And it has consequences right now. It used to be, 30, 40 years ago that the states were viewed as laboratories of democracy because you kind of try ideas out and see what worked and didn't work. And that's becoming less and less true as they become less and less competitive. And it's
they're laboratories of authoritarianism and theocracy in many cases, which is
right.
what we call it.
There's been some books by political scientists making that point. Yeah. And that's a problem for the country. It's a genuine one. And again, it's a widespread one. It's not limited to our particular state.
All right, let's get back to your poll here. Another issue that you polled on were gun safety laws. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to pull a couple of the things that I saw in there. It seems like most were against extending the open carry law to long guns, which was a bill that Monty Fritz had, basically lowering the age to 18 and letting anybody carry any gun they wanted. I think the Senate killed it, so it didn't pass, but that was a bill. And according to your poll, most people do not want that to happen. And then another one was that they are split on arming teachers, which, I guess I understand, but we've now seen pretty much every school district that weighed in on this come out against it. But you're saying that it's actually more split than people realize. What were your takeaways on gun safety laws in Tennessee?
So I think it's a tale of two stories. One is that the kind of modest reforms that Governor Lee proposed right after the tragedy of Covenant, that the state legislature failed to take up in August, and they continue to take up in August, that there's widespread support for those kinds of modest reforms, making sure people are responsible for handling their guns. And it's across the board. Even the strongest NRA supporters are on the same page. When it comes to actually giving people access to guns, like teachers being able to have the option of carrying, it becomes a very partisan issue. It's split down the road for the state, but Democrats very much oppose it. Republicans very much support it. And so what the state legislature did in that particular case wasn't as unrepresentative as one might think, because of the strong Republican support for that opportunity. Now, a lot of the districts aren't going to follow through on that because they don't think it's needed.
Well, we've seen zero so far that are saying they will.
And, and there's good reasons for that. So a lot of this is symbolism. And again, it gets back to the problem we just talked about, is that our state legislators are acting rationally in the sense that their concern about re-election isn't the general election. They're concerned about getting attacked from the right. So they spend all their time tending to the extreme, which from their electoral position, given gerrymandering, makes sense. It just doesn't collectively yield good, small d Democratic outcomes.
Right. And I failed to mention when I was talking about some of the findings that you also have that most Tennesseans are in favor of, extreme risk protection orders. I won't use the word red flag law because I know that invokes some serious emotion, but extreme risk protection orders to restrict access to guns for individuals at high risk of harming themselves or others. More than 3/4 of Tennesseans are in favor of it, including Republicans.
That's right.
So, this is something that Governor Lee basically said we were going to have the special session about, and yet the Republican supermajority did not budge on it during the special session. So here's a case where we say that they're pandering to basically their base, but really they're out of touch with their own base on this.
That's right. I mean, the base that they're dealing with is the handful of primary voters who can be often very extreme, and they're worried that all of a sudden a whole bunch of people will show up in a low turnout election and cause them to lose. And so they're
Is that true though? I mean, do we know if that's actually true? Because it feels like they're kind of afraid of their own shadow, and if they would just stand up and be strong on this stuff, it might not go as bad as they think.
I think they could. I think that's a reasonable strategy, but a lot of them will point to, and understandably so, the case where Johnson, the majority leader, faced a challenge from this guy Humble in August of 2022, and Humble came out of nowhere attacking him from the right and almost beat him.
But that wasn't just on this issue.
No,
that was
was
on a lot of things. And also,
things,
Jack didn't take him seriously. I live in that district. Jack didn't take him seriously. Gary was going after him on a lot of things. And, I think that's a separate issue. It's fair to bring it up. I'm not saying it's not fair to bring it up, but I don't think that was entirely about this.
No, it's not entirely about this, but it's the point is that got, the other state legislators' attention, saying, here's a majority leader, conservative guy, and all of a sudden gets attacked from the far right and almost loses. And so then who are you tending to? You're not worried about the general election because that's already been set up for you. So you worry about fending off challenges at all times. And that's what's, I think, is happening. And it's bad for the state. If you go back in history in the state, when Howard Baker and Lamar Alexander, started basically getting the Republican Party in a much stronger position, and you saw all the progress that was made during Alexander's term, during Ned McWhorter's term, even during Sundquist's term, holding aside the income tax issue that upset so many Republicans. But lots of progress was made because the parties cooperated. And I fear that, and the state had lagged under one-party Democratic rule prior to the rise of people like Howard Baker and Lamar Alexander. And now I worry we're going to get back to this one-party rule, and the state is going to suffer. And certainly reputationally, people think the state is way more conservative than actually it is. And that's too bad. It's going to make it harder for the booming businesses in Nashville to recruit the best talent from a place like Seattle or Boston. And that's we've got to fight that, because it's not, yes, it's a conservative state. We're just not that conservative.
Well, I think my pushback would be that we're already there in terms of that one party state that you're worried about us being, and I think you're 100% right. There are things that we're losing out on already. We're losing out on, teacher talent. We're losing, doctors are leaving because of these draconian abortion bans. I think we're losing out on a lot of conferences that are not coming here because of where we've gone, that they're not as public about as I would like them to be. I mean, I know of a couple of conferences that decided not to come here because of some of the laws that we passed, and I wish they were more vocal about the reasons for it. A couple other things that I'm just going to run through. Marijuana, most people are in favor of legalizing marijuana for recreational use, which again, the Republican supermajority is not moving forward on, large part because I think Lieutenant Governor McNally is against that, and he stacks the key committee on that with people who are against it. Another one is most back IVF. Again, there was a bill to codify protections for IVF. Republicans blocked it in this past session. Not to say that, they're not banning it yet, but we have seen some of the pro-life groups hint that might be coming, because in terms of, right.
And that's that the IVF thing is, there's just people, first of all, don't even think it's a political issue. It just should be something that if families are, want to pursue that option, they should be able to do it. And, only 10% think it should be illegal. I mean, it's just a very small number, and we'll see how it plays out. And, I do think, my view is that the kind of extremism that we've been seeing is beginning to have a bit of a cost. And you can see that in the gender divide. That divide is growing. I mean, I was stunned by the fact that among women, Gloria Johnson leads Marsha Blackburn. I'm surprised by that, because in the previous poll that we did in December, Marsha Blackburn had about a 5-point lead. And now that's flipped to being behind by 6 points. There's a cost that's going to be associated with this kind of extremism, that, you have these, people who are conservative, big Second Amendment supporters, female, from suburban counties being shut out by the state legislature. That's not a good look. And I think that it does suggest that, we have a little bit too much extremism, and we need to get back to where people like a Lamar Alexander or a Bob Corker are, feeling represented by the state legislature. I doubt they are these days.
I doubt they are, but they also aren't exactly standing up and being vocal about it, sadly. And this is what you were talking about. They've got Marsha beating Gloria 51-40, but men favor Blackburn, while women now favor Gloria over Blackburn 49-43. So if women were to turn out, then Gloria has a better chance there. And that is pretty surprising to see, but it shows that things are kind of moving. And I completely agree with you about the extremism factor. Can you talk a little bit more about the gender gap? I know that was one of your headlines. What are some of the other ways that you saw men and women differing?
Well, they differ on the issue of pro-life, pro-choice. Women are much more likely to be pro-choice. Medicaid expansion, women are much more in favor of that. If you take a look at the role of vaccines, women are much more favorable of that. And this is a national trend, by the way. I mean, women.
So are women just smarter?
Well, I mean, that would certainly be one interpretation. And I would say that knowing all the women I know, I suspect that's probably true.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
But
certainly in my household.
Yeah, exactly. It's important to know that this is going on nationally. I do think that the Dobbs decision is something that's caused a lot of women to take a look at the Republican Party again. And that's,
and also the lack of movement on gun laws,
I think that makes a difference. And so, these things are, add up, and you can just take a look at, basically any kind of issue, and you see it. If you allowed in presidential elections since 1980, only women to vote, the only time the Republicans would have won was 1984 when Ronald Reagan swamped Walter Mondale. Otherwise, the Democrats would have won every other presidential election. So the gender gap.
It's white men that prop up the Republican Party. It's white men.
That's right. And but the point being that this is something that's going on in the state, and if it's going on in our state, and it's not about to turn the state blue. That's not my point.
Right.
But then what's happening in a place like Michigan or a place like Wisconsin, where all of a sudden it's very competitive, and that kind of shift can put the turn the state blue, so to speak, in a very competitive race. So we'll have to see. I mean, these things, there's a lot of national things that are going on. You can see it in Tennessee. Because we're not a competitive state, it's not going to, be, Trump will win the state, right? That's really hardly breaking news. But that's not going to change anytime soon. But the realities are that there are these shifts going on, and we'll see if they play out in certain key legislative races. And
one of the things that we always say here is, yes, we're not a swing state, electorally speaking, but we are sort of the tip of the spear when it comes to the culture war stuff. It feels like this is where they try out a lot of these extreme laws to see how they play here, and then end up exporting them to the rest of the country. We've seen that with a few different things, like these school attacks or the drag ban. So it does seem like, even if you're not paying attention to Tennessee for electoral reasons, in terms of these culture war reasons, Tennessee is definitely, like you said, a laboratory for a lot of this stuff.
Well, it's interesting that there was a long period of time when Tennessee really wasn't, paid a lot of attention to, because we weren't competitive. Now we're getting attention again, but for not particularly good reasons. And I think some of those reasons are unfair, but it's the point being that, some of the actions of the state legislature got attention, especially following Covenant, and, or in many cases, it's just inactions too.
Right.
Well,
just as a final thing here, just to tie it up, you say that less than half voters approve of the job the legislature is doing. So, maybe those people will turn out and start to express themselves at the polls coming up. I will make no secret that I hope that happens. And, I appreciate you coming on here. Is there anything else you feel like we didn't cover that you want to talk about?
No, happy to always talk about polls. And I just think that, having evidence like this is important to the conversation. Again, it shouldn't drive the conversation, but it needs to be part of it. And part of the reason why I, along with Josh Clinton, do this poll is that we think it's important that these data be part of the conversation. Without it, you'd have people making claims about public opinion without any evidence. And so we're happy to provide this. People will claim they don't like the poll, but they tend to pay attention to it.
I think it's really useful, and I appreciate you doing it. And maybe we could make a habit of, when you put these things out, we could hop on here and talk about what's changed and what hasn't.
Happy to do that.
All right. Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate it. Take care.
Take care, Justin. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So that is John Geer, director of the Vandy poll that just came out today. Again, this was the headline. It said, majority of Tennessee voters now pro-choice, probably something that most people wouldn't have expected. And then that there's a gender gap developing on key issues. So just to reiterate the pro-choice thing, most women, more women, are definitely pro-choice or somewhat pro-choice than men. And overall, that translates to the fact that now more Tennesseans are pro-choice than pro-life when you ask them that question. So, that is probably something that you would not have expected if you were only to pay attention to our legislature, which has us with one of the most strict abortion laws in the entire country. Very few exceptions, even for the life of the mother. We have women fleeing the state to get abortions. That's why Allie Phillips is now running in Clarksville. She's somebody that had to do that, and now she's running to become somebody to change the laws. And then we also force raped children to carry to term in Tennessee. And not only that, they just passed a law that if you help a minor go to another state to get an abortion, they've now made that a crime. Jason Zachary carried that bill. And so, one of the headline takeaways here, and this is not my words, although this is obviously something that I think, and I think a lot of you that follow us probably think, this is what they said: suggests there continues to be a misalignment between the actions of the state legislature, which that's the Republican supermajority. A lot of times in this language, they say state legislature rather than Republican supermajority. The media does that too. I believe that's covering for them, frankly. And I understand why you do it in a poll like this, but when the media does it, that really bothers me, especially in their headlines, because when you have all the Republicans vote one way and all the Democrats vote another way, and then you say, oh, the state legislature did this, that's just not true. It's factually inaccurate, and it's covering up for their extreme behavior. So here it says, the state legislature and a majority of registered voters, there's a misalignment between them on a number of key policies. And again, the reason that is able to happen is because we have gerrymandering, we have voter suppression. We are like number one in disenfranchised Black voters in this state, because we have turned voter suppression into an art form, and we make it nearly impossible to get your voting rights back if you've been convicted of a crime. And I think they just made it harder recently. Then they said, you have to get your gun rights back to get your voting rights back. That was a recent thing. And that's now, that was a bill that somebody had, I forget who, it's escaping me, to fix that, and they blocked it. So, Republicans don't want people to vote. And this is the result of that. You have these laws that don't reflect what the people of this state actually want. And the Vandy poll is kind of the best evidence that we have in this state of that disconnect, and maybe the only evidence. The Democrats are on a bus tour right now talking to people about what they want to do, and people are showing up for that, but there's no real way to prove to the public that the Republican supermajority isn't voting the way that the majority of the state feels. And so this poll kind of shows what we say all the time. And so it's helpful. That's why I wanted to have John on here, and I appreciate that he did that. All right. Thank you all so much for watching. Jay says, welcome to fascism, and pro-life is a joke, a slogan, and nothing more. Jay says the Supreme Court will ensure Trump becomes the next president. That's a whole other conversation that we will have a little bit with Megan Barry, who will be on with us in about an hour. So I'm going to sign off now. Join us again at noon. Megan Barry is running for Congress in the 7th District, which is the district that I ran in against Mark Green, who beat me. We'll talk about her campaign and I will get to take a trip down memory lane about Mark Green, which I'm looking forward to. Thanks for following. See you in an hour.